Welcome to Some Things Considered, the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity and we talk to cool people to find out what makes them tick. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. I'm an author. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University, and I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. For more about me and what I do, check out seanmurphy.net. Hey, welcome back to Some Things Considered. This is the podcast where we are obsessed with creativity and story, and we talk to cool people to figure out what makes them tick. I'm Sean Murphy, your host. I'm a writer. I direct the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts, and I also direct the Story Center at Shenandoah University. For more about that, check out seanmurphy.net. But the purpose of this podcast allows me to talk to some of these cool people I have the good fortune to interact with. And today is not only no exception. This is a very 2024 experience because I've known Charles for a while, but this is our first time together in real time. So I'm both excited and I'm honored. Charles Bock, let me introduce, is the author of the brand new memoir, I Will Do Better, as well as the novels Alice and Oliver and Beautiful Children, which, by the way, was a New York Times bestseller and notable book, and which won the Sue Kaufman Prize for first fiction from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in the New Yorker, Harper's, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Newsweek, People, The Believer, Vice, LA Times, Slate, Writer's Digest. You get the picture. This guy's the real deal. He's also been in numerous anthologies. He lives with his daughter in New York City. Always a shout out for anyone that's coming from the Big Apple. Charles, thank you for being here. It's great to be on camera with you.
Sean, this is a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be face to face, and it's a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely my pleasure. So, like I said, and right before we came on air, I'll just go ahead and people that follow me know I do this, but the dog ear test is always, I mean, I guess someone could cheat and just dog ear pages, but
Yeah, good.
no one's going to have a podcast about writing if they're going to that level of
Right.
deception. But this is a book that I recommend wholeheartedly. It moved me, and so I've really been looking forward to having the opportunity to talk about it. But before we dive into some of my questions and giving the author a chance to talk about it, um, give us the lay of the land. You know, every book release is different, the experience is different. I've seen some rapturous reviews. You've been out about on readings, so I mean, again, just for full stop, congratulations. But how are you feeling about everything?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you. That's nice of you to say. Um, the release of a book is always a fraught time. It is not natural because a writer kind of lives in your little shell, in your hovel, and every Haley's Comet, you get to come out, and a book goes into the world, and if you're really lucky, people will discuss it. You might get a review or two.
Yeah,
You might get some online chatter about it. That's it. That's the exception, not the rule. But that's weird when you spend most of your time in the cave. I'm not on social media that much. I have a Facebook page that's fairly small, but
right.
I'm not engaged in that way, the back and forth
Yeah,
of a continuing conversation. So it's a pleasure to go and read from the book and share it with people. It's a pleasure to talk with people like you about it.
yeah,
Um, it's been really fun. It's also a little weird because kind of the calm before the nothing. You spend all this time and all this time and all this time,
yeah.
and then it's out and then it's over, and you're like, oh, what happens now? And I'm starting to look at that.
Yeah.
So it's been great and it's been odd. And there's also been, occasional readings of the people in the book, the people who work at the bookstore. So, you get to the whole range of responses, but I'm very happy and very proud of the book, and I'm, again, thrilled to talk with you about it.
Well, thank you for that. And I'll say, we can just dive right in. We're already in the barrel, but I think the fact that you bring up social media engagement and what's clearly a writer's life, for lack of a better cliche, a more old school sensibility in terms of getting the work done, it begs two questions. One, why do we do what we do? And there's a million ways to answer that, but I think there's one fundamental. But the other thing, I think people like you write books like this um, because foremost in your mind is not the movie adaptation or how many Twitter followers it's going to get you. There's something, a story that not only I think you're compelled to tell artistically, but there's almost like an invitation for engagement. A book like this is its own, like it's its own product and it counts for itself. But a book like this is an opportunity for people to experience their own sorrow, their own grief, their own pain. It's an enlarging process.
And they also get to experience jokes and the joy of parenting, even as the frustrations of parenting also compete with it. It's so there's a lot. My, I went through a lot. Not as much as my late wife. My late wife was diagnosed with, advanced leukemia when our daughter was 6 months old. She went through 2 bone marrow transplants to try and stay alive so she could be a mother. That was what she always wanted to be. And she passed away 3 days before our daughter's third birthday. And so that left me, I was whatever, 40 something, and I was broke, and I was emotionally done, exhausted,
Yeah.
and bereft, and also responsible for this innocent, beautiful little girl. That's like the starting point of my book. Our
Yep.
I Will Do Better is the story of our next 2 years. And the title is something that every parent says 50 times a day, constantly. It's something I told myself all the time. And meanwhile, I tried to write, it's a book about a little girl who has no mom, who wants to go to the ball, and a dad who's terrified and doesn't know how he's going to do this.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, it's kind of a fairy tale. And it's a fairy tale about this flawed, scared, reluctant, selfish man and his daughter for 2 years in New York City. And I needed to write it at the point where I didn't know what my next book would be. I didn't know exactly what I was doing. But when I was trying to figure things out, what was apparent was being a father to Lily has been the major defining point of my life. Um,
Yeah.
as being a writer, yeah, even trying to save Diana, very much so when she was ill,
Yeah.
but that didn't really work. And then I was left with this responsibility. And I love my daughter, but I didn't want that responsibility, but I took it. And when it was time to try and write about something, I felt like I had enough distance. Maybe
Yeah.
my last book, my last novel, Alice and Oliver, which is a book I'm very proud of, but it's possible that I tried to write it too soon, you know? And while I was working on it, I actually thought, well, it's going to take me a while to do. That will give me some distance.
Right.
I don't know if it did. I'm very proud of that book.
Yeah.
But in this case, I wrote about Lily and my time together when she's 3 and 4. I didn't start that book, I didn't start working on it till she was 9 and 10. And then, as every parent knows, you feel like you can reach back into a picture and grab them and hold them and be with them when they're 4, when they're 5, but you can't. They're 15.
Yeah.
They don't, it's a different time. They need you for different things. There's different rewards, there's different wonderful parts of it, different horrors, but
Right.
they're not 4 and 5 anymore.
Yeah.
This was my chance to have that dialogue, to try and recapture, and to also try and make sense of this very difficult, very important time in our lives. Those are the things that I think, for me, that's a story, and it has an importance that transcends a social media, that will put me in my cave, and I can engage with paragraphs if I know that there's a point to them, if I get a sense of what this scene is supposed to do, or if I'm trying to find out what scenes are supposed to do, because I knew that this was so, it was compelling to me.
Hmm.
And I think that is the first level in important why, how a person can sit for hours at a time when there's no not necessarily any guarantees out there, is that level of, is it compelling to you? And this
Right.
was the most compelling thing for me to figure out, was was to come to terms with these years and how, who I was, to try and hold my daughter still. It seemed like a worthwhile project. Yeah.
Well, indeed. And I would say that you really just provided a very compelling assessment of the difference perhaps between art and entertainment, which is, I think, what you did is you took a true story, a very real story, a story that clearly was deeply important to you, but because of your talent and the distance and the execution and intent,
Yeah.
it's bigger. This is a very, in my opinion, obviously a very personal story, but it does manage to go to that other place where we're talking about grief with a capital G. We're talking about death. We're talking about fatherhood, talking about loneliness, regret. And it's to your tremendous credit that this does not read as a half-baked journal entry. I mean, I know you teach.
Yeah.
I've been in workshops from various perspectives, and one of the things we tell younger writers is, and I'm glad you mentioned this notion of distance, like being able to inoculate yourself by saying, "But this is how it really happened." It's like that is very real and valid, but that doesn't mean it's good writing.
Well, it doesn't. And in fact, oftentimes it's a mask for for excuses, or it's a false god that someone's putting their resources toward.
Yeah.
My nonfiction book, my memoir, I Will Do Better, I combine characters, I combine events, I abbreviate time in certain places, I cut things out.
Mhm.
Someone might say, well, is that fiction? I can tell you when like in 2 years, so many people come through your life
Yeah.
that if I list them all, the different people who deliver food or who I talk with,
Yeah.
just names mean nothing. They start to
That's right.
become meaningless.
That's
And
right.
one trait, and the person you never see them again.
Yeah.
So that actually is going to get in the way of the idea of a narrative. This is how, if you're going to communicate something, then you have rules of what a story does and what it is. And you can, if you understand how to circumvent those rules, you can, but that takes a level of craft. And
Yeah.
first, you have to understand the craft before you can find the holes in it. I am able to say, okay, if this character is a composite on page 52, they're a
Mhm.
composite of A, B, C, and D.
Right.
Who did, and A did this, B did this, C did this, D did this, and I combined them for these reasons and created F.
Yeah.
And that occupies this place in a story. If I do that right, hopefully that gets rid of unnecessary repetitions.
Right.
Repetitions where you don't advance the chess pieces a little bit. Hopefully it keeps the narrative going. It stays true because I can annotate it,
Yeah.
but it is not James Frey saying he had a root canal with no Novocaine on page
Right.
one when there's
Right.
no Novocaine, there's no teeth, etc. You
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
there are, I think that you can be true to the ideas of nonfiction and true to the ideas of narrative and still deliver art and craft and storytelling. I believe that, and I believe that's what I did. I also believe, let's say, if you wrote a book where a little kid was being raised by her grandpa who played football, and grandpa takes the kid to strip clubs and takes the kid to biker rallies and robs banks with the little 5 year old, right? And
Mhm.
that's what the little kid writes about in her memoir about the man who raised her.
Mhm.
She also probably owes it to grandpa to say that when he passed, he had CTE, on his brain, and he had brain damage from playing 5 years in the NFL. That his brain, and that might explain decisions. That without the full story of that, you're not being responsible to everyone you're writing about. So that
Yeah.
you do have some obligations.
Yeah.
I like to believe that I fulfilled the obligations that I had in terms of both, in terms of to the people in the book, you know.
Yeah.
So, which is a way of saying that you can do some shit. You can play around. You have some latitudes, but you also have responsibilities. Uh,
Right.
Cheryl Strayed's Wild being a great example. She has an author's note in the start of it that explains, she was off the grid for 10 years. You can't give us every day of 10 years.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, I love that, Charles. And I think, when we're writing, we do have the opportunity. I mean, particularly with fiction, that is an opportunity that can become an addiction for the writer to play God. I
right.
think with nonfiction and autobiography in particular, it's like the stakes are at once higher. And again, I think a lesser writer can hide behind, but I'm just saying it like it was. So again, that begs the question, is it readable? Is it any good? Is this serving a larger purpose?
Right.
This, like I said, is unvarnished. So that the High Wire Act, where you're not only talking about true things that happen, but your own family and yourself. Um, I don't think this could be the work of a less mature writer
Oh,
because
well,
the elements of craft and maturity bring to bear how these pieces come together in a convincing way.
I couldn't have written this book 10 years ago. I
Right.
know that. Even,
Right.
and probably, and certainly it couldn't have been my first book. There's no, there's, that would have not been possible. When I sat to write this, and as I rewrote it and kind of worked on the drafts, because there were quite a few drafts of it, and would get feedback um, from people being like, "Oh, this middle is too long. This scene is interminable. You have to do something about it. It makes me want to put my head through a wall," etc., etc.
Right.
I became more and more aware, like, it took me a while to find the language that was right and the pacing and the idea that there can't be any extra words, that the sentences need to be full, but they also need to be burned down to their essence,
Yes.
to also capture my own weird language because I speak not good and sometimes use junk to fill in points.
Yeah.
So I have to convey that.
Yeah.
And then the more I worked on it, the more I like would return to things like The Princess Bride or Curious Case, Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, or books that are just page turners,
Yeah.
because I wanted this to be something where 200 pages, no fat, really good storytelling.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be funny and at the same time to be honest in the sense of it does deal with harder things. But the
Yeah.
truth is, we all know harder things often are funny. Absurd things happen to you in dark moments.
Yeah.
Kids do say it is a law of nature that a child will say, "Daddy, Daddy, look at me," right before you're guaranteed a really good face plant. 5 seconds, you know it's coming, like kids are hilarious and they're hilarious and they're both both in the beautiful life affirming way and in a way that is absurd Coen brothers type humor, that could be I got in my head that could be good, this could be something,
Yeah.
and uh yeah.
Well, and when we talk about how we get to know, Charles as a human being, that's a great chicken egg question in the sense that there is plenty of humor, there's plenty of lightness, there's plenty of love, um, that's not forced. And so I think that that's more, I mean, with all credit to your writing ability, we're seeing the complexities of life. But personally, when we're talking about literature, um, I don't think people that aren't funny or aren't clever can fake that. So
No,
it does
no,
pass. This does pass the smell test of a
okay.
man in full. The
Oh,
good, the bad, the ugly, but the funny. And that sense of humor probably helped save you. And it helps save many of us when we go through
oh,
profound distress.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just no way that humor is not just the life raft, right? And it's both a struggle, it's fighting the man, and it's a cry against nature. And some people say that humor is a form of violence, which, like anyone who says that, you just know they do not have a sense of humor. Like,
Right.
right, like I, you must be just a scream, and
Yeah.
right, and am I
Yeah.
being violent by saying that? I don't know, but someone who says that even is perpetuating violence by dismissing,
Right.
by dismissing one of the most primal human emotions that there is,
Yeah.
and it's also a level of intelligence too.
Yes.
So, uh, you know, now scarred is like by anyone who reads a paragraph or a page by that man, even if you don't enjoy it, you can't deny he is a thrilling writer. Like his sentences are wow.
Uh-huh.
Has he ever said something funny? Will he ever say something funny? Like
Yeah.
you can be a great writer and not have a sense of humor. That's who he is, right?
Right.
You know, I might read him and be very admiring, but also be like, until you give me some hair tips, I don't care. Hair care tips, if you don't have them, because if you can't be even a little funny here and there, how I'm not going to spend 800 pages with you.
Right.
Melville was funny, like like we don't think of that way. You don't think that way, but it's true. Moby Dick is actually has jokes. Uh,
That makes me so happy that you name check not only him but that book because I completely agree. Um, and that's probably the two things I would say about Moby Dick that I think that are like a personal. that cause me great deal of pain are the people haven't read it because they don't
No
have any
one
idea
will
it's
ever read.
funny, and they don't have any idea that the great white book about the great white whale by the great white man is a paean to diversity and has a cast of characters that is literally global.
I mean, you know, I think our mutual friend Rick Moody has this great short story about from the point of view of the African American or the Moor sailor who falls off the side of the boat.
Pip.
Pip, yeah. Pip Adrift is what it's called.
Mm.
You know, and if you can't really explain to people like just what that book is or was, you know, because they don't it's Moby Dick. It's big and boring. That's what it is, you know.
Yeah.
And okay, that all right, what can you do? But if you then read a page and you know, or find someone who knows how to read and they read a page,
Yeah.
that it's a different story. But it's also true, like the publisher of that book, the first edition doesn't have the last five chapters. Like, like they ran out of pages. No one checked it. It was so long that it just like the first printing didn't run with the actual whole book of Moby Dick.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so, you know, it, in some like that, which is like a lesson for all of us. Don't write a funny book that's 800 pages, you know?
Yeah, that's one key takeaway. Well, so I'm not there's some more to talk about here, but
Yeah.
that's a good you just teed up for me kind of transitioning into the life of the writer, which is
Yeah.
something I know we both have skin in that game. Melville is a case study, wrote arguably the great American novel and, wasn't well reviewed, didn't make money on it. So, that old story has been playing out for centuries, but in the conversations I've been having recently, whether I'm attacking it from an academic perspective, what's going on the college teaching level, or even from the student's perspective, but the literary industry, the notion of the hustle and branding, it's not a time full of optimism. And I'm increasingly convinced that it's really more an economic situation than anything that relates specifically to academia or the book
Well,
world.
let me ask you something. When you're talented students, do you recommend they go into go try and get an MFA program? What do you say to someone who's a talented, who has some ability and who comes in and is trying to figure out what their next steps are? Like, do you say, go, go chase this life?
Right. It's such a first of all, it's a great question, and I don't know if anyone's ever directly asked me that. I usually shy away from that because I never want to sound anti-MFA, which I am not
Right,
in any. I'm not anti-MFA, just like I'm not anti-NBA. If someone has a noticeable talent at a sport or an instrument and says this is what I want to do, you say there are going to be certain benchmarks that will indicate can you do it and will
right.
you be successful at it.
You're averaging six a game at a Division III school.
Yeah, you might have a shot, although that's actually a really dumb analogy because with writing it is
You're
very
you're
subjective.
5'11".
Yeah, but you could theoretically, this is why it gets depressing, right? You could be an excellent writer, and all the professors and even agents and editors are saying this is masterful, and it just doesn't sell. But to answer your question, I've been saying since I was too young to be giving this advice, any writer that assumes that they're going to make a living either through writing or teaching is taking a really big gamble because
Yeah,
the world's never been kind to these people, and there's never been a sense of stability. And as we've seen, tenure track jobs go the way of the white whale.
yeah.
You know, the prospects are gloomy. So I'm more bullish on creativity and people finding a way to communicate effectively But in terms of what are the career paths, I think it's a brutal economic reality right now.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds right. That sounds right to me. I tell students, I try and tell them not to, if they're gifted, I say it's like asking someone out who's a friend of yours. You're already not sleeping with her. So in that sense, what are you gonna, what do you got to lose?
Right.
Like you're already not going to an MFA program. So nothing will be hurt by you finding out. I try to, and if that's something you want to find out, then, like I start to talk to them about how to do your best, how to make your best impression. But I also say, like don't go into debt. Like find places that have funding.
Yeah.
Apply to a lot of places. Don't only apply to Iowa and like the Michener Center and Stanford because
Right.
you're kind of walking into a hornet's nest in the level of people who are going to get in. Like
Yeah.
5 people get in at Irvine a year. It's fully funded, but
Yeah.
it means there's five, that there's no slots, and maybe that's training or what have you, but you can't have that be your only way.
Right.
So try to give yourself a chance. And
Right.
that, because the truth is there's great teachers everywhere. Whatchamacallit, that guy who wrote Martyr, Kabe Akbar, like he went to Indiana State or Indiana like he got his MFA from somewhere where you don't necessarily think of them as
Right.
being but there was great teachers there, and
Yeah.
on his own afterwards, he worked real hard and he ended up with a great book. So
Yeah.
wonderful things happen.
Yeah.
I like if that's what someone wants to spend their life at, I do try and be real about like
Yeah.
you can be great at this. You can be a great writer and have a very hard, and you will have a hard life. You're
Right.
kind of, that's the nature of the a writer's life, unless, I guess I don't think Gary Steingart writing for Succession and writing great, funny Russian American novel after Russian American novel, I don't think that his life is like a life of pain and misery, but
Right.
he's an exception as opposed to the rule.
Yeah.
So I try and be realistic about what it means while also trying to be supportive and helpful
Yeah.
so that they can go on whatever quest they need to go on. Yeah.
Here. I think that first of all, I want to underscore. I think your advice to avoid debt is very necessary and responsible. But I think what's happening, I'm seeing it a little bit here and there because the shock wave hasn't hit yet, and maybe it never will. But what I didn't see, say, even 10 years ago, was MFA programs did exist, speaking very broadly in a bubble. It was a very, it's a degree of privilege
Yeah.
that people have either the time and or the resources. But what I didn't like, what I would see, say, 10 and certainly 20 years ago, where the programs kind of defended themselves by saying, we're not giving anyone false hope. This is a place to get away and focus on craft. And it's like, absolutely. But there needs to be, in my opinion, I'm speaking only for myself, there needed and still needs to be some kind of honest discussion with the students that, yes, we're here to work on craft and this is your opportunity to be away from the grind to focus on that. But the likelihood that you're going to make a living at this is exceedingly small. So, are there things that might be amenable to your personality that you can think about as a day job so that all your eggs aren't in one basket? And I feel like MFA programs are starting to at least acknowledge that.
Well, I mean, I guess the question that I hope so, but I
Yeah.
guess the question is how do you acknowledge, like, how do you tell someone that? I've been on, uh, uh, without wanting to get into like the nitty gritty of how academics works, but I've I've done senior thesis readings at high, good, strong level schools
Mhm.
where I've marked up, line edited a manuscript, and because I would tell the person it's not where you think it is, it's not ready, and these are the flaws I'm seeing, and this is your direction forward, and you may be very talented,
Mhm.
and this has promise, but it's not there yet, which is, let's be honest, 99% of MFA students need to hear that.
Yeah.
It's the exception, the rare exception, who is
Mhm.
ready that quickly. Usually it is years later that your manuscript is ready to go.
Right.
I've had that experience where the student didn't even want to take the line edits, was so upset and so shocked and depressed by the news that this was not going to Binky, was not going to the head of Random House,
Right.
that I wasn't going to like open the Rolodex and be like, please
Yeah.
move forward.
Yeah.
So like it's a hard conversation.
Yeah.
People, especially if people get into a high level MFA program, that's an accomplishment. It's really competitive, it's really hard. They should be praised.
Yep.
It's hard to explain to them that there's levels to this stuff.
Sure.
That getting it that there's still ways to difference because in some ways that's already they think that that means that they've gotten into the mafia, right? That now that they're now a member of the mob because they got into X or Y.
Yeah.
Um, so in some ways, the nature of the beast does not allow itself to acknowledge this is going to be a road. It's going to take a while. You're going to have to find a way to support yourself, and you're
Yeah.
going to have to find your way to support yourself and to do your creative work simultaneously.
Right.
I don't know what the answer is to that because I myself don't know the answer to that in my regular life I'm a 50 something year old man who's never been able to figure out how to juggle both of those tomatoes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the story of our lives, right? If
Right,
you're in,
right.
you've got to be all in, but that means that you're burning certain bridges as you go further down that river.
And it's, you get to a certain age where you're like, why don't I have a 401k? Why can't I send my kid to summer camp? I would like to be able to go and do this or do that. And there's people who do it, and there's people who have, I haven't been able to figure like that out for myself,
Mhm.
but I also know that, and I do wonder, like the red blue split of the United States, the way uh, certain governors in certain states are trying to affect college campuses.
Yeah.
I think that that's going to affect MFA programs very seriously. I think that there will be MFA programs in blue states and they will have a certain quality of teacher. And then
Mhm.
there will be MFA programs in red states and they won't. Because I don't know who's going to want to teach in schools where they're told there's no such thing as science.
Right.
when they're
Right.
where they're engaged, where their books may be barred from libraries, where their partners may not be considered to be partners.
Yeah.
That's going to mean less. It's going to affect the MFA programs. I think eventually, or maybe very quickly,
Mhm.
but I don't. So I don't even know how that's going to shake out.
Right.
It seems like one more weird thing that's happening in our world.
Well, yeah, and it's like never mind MFA programs. I think, humanities
Yeah,
departments
humanity
are
is
are
under
under
assault.
fire. And I think the thing I'm reading and hearing a lot is that students are increasingly seen as the customer, which is at once
Yeah, well,
very businessy. It makes a sick sort of sense, but it's everything. It's antithetical to the old academic model, which is you went there to question, you went there to not necessarily get all the answers, but also to be challenged. And if the student feels like, or the parents say, "Well, I'm paying you good money. I want my kid to be happy," or et cetera. There's not a lot of growth, I think, intellectually and spiritually that's going to occur.
yeah, well, I think all of us maybe have seen some versions of and dealt with some of the fallout of that. Yeah, that's probably right.
So 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 that yeah, that is something that's going to be continuing to shake out. You alluded earlier to the fact that you're not a big presence on social media, and I find that refreshing only because the other conversation that I seem to have all the time is people wanting to weigh in on or ask me about, and I'm the last person to have a good advice on, but this notion of now everyone's branding. You're a brand more than you're an author. You're a brand more than you're a creative. And sadly, there's some truth in that too. I mean, it's hard to argue that that's like literally the truth, but you mentioned being in your cave, and I think that when I say old school sensibility, I mean, when we were coming up, there wasn't social media, but you do have to get the work done. But it becomes this weird push and pull of, well, say you get the work done. How do you get it out there? And I do think this
Oh,
this weight is on authors now.
oh, this is such an interesting point and worth some, it would be worth like a good panel about this somewhere, but I don't even know if they would want this panel because it would be so, it could cause some chaos. In our generation or our time,
Yeah,
Pynchon didn't do interviews. J.D. Salinger famously refused publicity.
yeah,
And we came up as like Xers in the 80s, you were afraid of selling out. In the 90s, it was the cardinal sin would be to sell out your integrity to
yeah,
to corporate America.
yeah,
The web changed that. The it just it the interconnection and then social media. You
mhm,
have generate and the idea of like creativity being connected to the web and just it blew this away to where success and being seen and being known are a commodity. Now, a lot of my peers, I wouldn't want to say most, but I think that there's a strain of my peers who are not on social media. And some of them are friends of mine who are, far more successful writers than I am. But there's a way of doing things that did not involve constantly, constantly putting your opinions and yourself out there because that's what your books were for.
yes,
It's easier. It's easier. It's fun to come up with 140 character sentences. Zadie writes a novel in 140 character segment,
right,
as
right,
an exercise because and you get instant gratification, which let's be honest, we all love and we all want and
mhm,
is great.
yeah,
So a different time and a different era has risen.
right,
I, me and my daughter, for this wonderful book I wrote, I Will Do Better, available from Abrams Books. We we made videos. Some of it I found old footage of me and her, and we created a little video from that. But then I also scripted something, and we put it together, and then to try and put it on TikTok and Instagram. But I'm not on TikTok and Instagram. There's not even a way for me to I would have to get followers. I would have to get an audience and cultivate them and do all these things. It's too
yeah.
late. You know, like
Yeah,
you can't even advertise, you can't even put yourself in it
right,
unless you give yourself to the wholeness of posting on Instagram, of
right.
engaging, of following people back,
Yep,
which is its own system. It's its own working ecosystem or whatever you want to call it. You can't, I don't know how to do that and write and raise, let's say I also have to raise my daughter.
yep.
And every now and then I probably should bathe and do other things like that. Maybe eat.
Yeah,
I don't, to be good at Instagram is to be doing, I think, because I don't even know how much time it takes to take the pictures and do the video.
right.
The one, two videos that we did took forever and caused massive amounts of fights in my home and, and all that stuff.
Sure.
So I don't know, but I mean, Michael Chabon was on Twitter. There's Roxane Gay made a career for herself. She's not
Yep,
alone in that.
yep,
There are very talented, smart people
yep,
who do their work and then make their little tweet X's or tweets or whatever, put their
right.
pictures on, and they're fine.
Yep.
I it I'm outside of it.
Yeah.
And I'm also it's been and I don't know how to I don't know if it's worth the time to catch up to it,
Right.
you
Well,
know?
so that's the million-dollar question. And from what I've seen and experienced, it's interesting because it's not even a yin yang of if one could have the social following, then it would be the complete solar system. What I'm seeing is that the people that have become good at that, it's so consuming, requires so much effort that
Right.
that is where the majority of the creativity and time goes. And it's debatable if that engagement on those platforms is helping move copy anyway.
Well, I that's the other thing is I don't know if it was, wouldn't we know? Wouldn't that have become clear? I think maybe there's some people maybe that have had that experience where it does move copy, but
Mhm.
more likely those people, the people who are selling books because of it, Roxane Gay is a strong, powerful person on any platform,
Right, right.
right?
Yeah,
And she didn't just stay on social media. She got into the editorial pages of the New York Times.
right.
So, you know, now maybe there's arguments that that's how you get there, but I don't know. I'd probably give it up and say it's more that she had a voice and had a lot to say.
Hmm.
And I think that's probably true of some other writers who have found, been found or discovered through social media, because they are out there. There are people who are and who wrote something and it got became viral. But
Yeah,
does it happen that much, honestly? I don't
I
know.
don't think so.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah,
I, I, I have students who kind of ask me about that stuff, and because I'm old and set in my ways, I say worry about your writing.
yes,
That if you want to if you want to write a book, then you probably need to worry about the book, and
right,
maybe worry about a sentence or a paragraph.
right.
Like you, but
Well, one thing I think it is safe to say, taking economics out of it entirely, I know what side I'm betting on, which is whether we're talking about a year of your life or 5 years of your life to write a book like this, or the work that any of us do on kind of the granular level, that time and that investment usually has a tangible result that we can feel proud of.
right.
And I do think, especially our compatriots that are around our age that have kind of dived into that social media pool, I think there's going to be a sense of having been shortchanged. And like, I gave away the best of myself for several years. And my Twitter following count is that's the payoff.
right, right.
Lest that sound judgy or heaven forbid snooty. It's just more of a, it does have to get back to, I think, whether we're talking about the classroom or our own lives, is as trite as I always feel saying this, if there's not a fundamental problem being solved in the writing itself, what the hell are you even doing this for?
You know, I right. Vonnegut, you know, was amazing because he accentuated the idea we're here to have fun, right? Like I'm here, we're on this earth to kind of fart around and have a good
Yeah,
time. And at
yeah,
the same time, you can't really pretend Breakfast of Champions is empty of content. You can't take his best books, you know, you can't take Slaughterhouse Five and pretend it's about nothing.
right.
Even as he kind of, oh, ha ha, you know, now he was, you know, he was taken prisoner of war. He was in Auschwitz. What,
Yeah,
or, you know, like he wrote about he wrote about PTSD before it was called PTSD.
that's right.
And
Yeah,
he didn't use a phrase. He put Billy Pilgrim through it. We read that book 50 years later.
yeah.
If we have books and paper and electricity on
Mhm.
whatever format we'll have, we will read about Billy Pilgrim, and so it goes. He put that into the world, you know?
Yeah.
Catch 22 is probably the funniest book ever written. Like
Hard
legitimate,
agree.
you know,
Hard agree.
if it's not, it's like tied, you know, it's right there, like it,
Yeah.
or it's like what lost a 15 round decision, it knocked the other dude down, and half the crowd is going away saying Catch 22 got robbed.
Yeah.
That's the worst that you could say about that book.
Yeah.
And it is deathly serious. It is, you know, the idea that like rom-coms kind of, or whatever it is, that you can just make the jokes and not have the other side of the mirror,
Yeah.
and it'll come back. It's
Yeah.
not true. You need that other space
Yeah.
for it to have resonance.
Yeah.
And I do think that there's something to be said for the resonance of a project that matters and that gives all the shades and all the flavors and all the tones of life.
Yes.
And maybe it doesn't hit every bell and pay every bill,
Yeah.
but there is also, I think, like our generation maybe grew up with a value of that, which maybe has is something that has changed because of the way that social media and commercial success and artistic success somehow became. Oh, sorry about that.
Not at all. This is a pet friendly podcast, so
Well, he's
whenever there's
guilty.
special guests,
I think my daughter must be coming home because usually that's what sets him off. Um,
if he wants to be on camera too, that's quite welcome.
oh, I don't know. Let me see. Let me get him. Hold on. What's going on here? What's going on, Buster? This is
Yeah.
Buster. This is Buster.
What's up, Buster? He's like, why don't I get to weigh in?
Yeah, he's like, I think that all of this should result in some pets and a dog treat. I think everything you're saying can be solved by pets and a dog treat.
Dogs have figured it out.
Yeah.
You
Anyway,
just dropped some beautiful knowledge. I would be remiss to not just add to that, almost like a little very modest cherry on this
yeah,
big Sunday. That not for nothing, both of those authors labored over those books. I'm always moved when I read about Vonnegut. I think it might even be in the foreword, acknowledging that it really drove him to distraction because he knew he had the idea, he just had to find a way into it And he had the patience and the faith to finally, when he hit it, it was a home run. But reading about him talking about, it wasn't that I didn't think the project was good, I just couldn't get a handle on it. That's so worth remembering for us mere mortals who feel frustration and know that it seldom comes easily.
Right. Well, I mean, that's just the truth of the truth of it. We don't get to say, like if we make art, we get to try to make art,
Yep.
and then, other factors get involved, I
Right.
guess. Yeah.
Right. I think the reason that you and me and many of our ilk, our Gen X ilk,
Yeah.
we do remember a world where it was quieter and there weren't the distractions. I do think in some ways we cultivated a certain zen. It gets memed now, our toughness or our resilience. But, you and I both came up in a time where we wrote short stories on paper and there was no audience, right? Like the best case scenario was you mailed it to a lit mag and maybe several months later got a rejection.
Maybe,
So there
maybe.
was no instant gratification. And I do think that that gave us thicker skin. My sensibility was shaped in an era where it is going to actually, I hate to say this because it's going to sound self-aggrandizing and it's quite the opposite, but whatever sensibility I developed, there was this understanding of you need to satisfy yourself. Like if the story or the book if it's done on some very fundamental level, you're going to know. And if you're cheating yourself, all the instant gratification that will wear off. And this we talked about before we came on air, however much time it takes or whatever happens, there is something indescribable um, about the process of putting yourself into an act that whatever happens it's done. It's been done.
That makes sense. I think, to be fair, there's also to be connected when you feel alone is a great thing. To have feedback, it can be a wonderful thing. Now, sometimes people assume that internet feedback is the same thing as critical feedback,
Right.
or a strong critical eye, and maybe there's
Right.
different standards. But to pretend that, like, I know that it's like things like social media art, like, and TikTok and
Mm-hmm.
Instagram, they're like, it is fun. It is interesting.
Sure.
I like to scroll.
Sure.
I like to, I think it's a miracle that I can at 10 o'clock at night watch one after another basketball highlights, 10 minutes, and watch a game in 10 minutes, can watch every basket. It's stunning. Like, to pretend otherwise, let's is
Yes.
and at the so um which is, so I don't want to be like, well, we should all be Luddites, because I'm not a Luddite, and I don't think you are. We know each
No,
other through social media.
that's right.
Um, it's also true, the craft and the art of getting a paragraph right
Mhm.
does not care about social media.
Right.
It just, it takes what it takes. And if this is the art that you do,
Mhm.
there it is. Then,
Yeah.
like, there it is. And then how do you protect the time it takes to do what you do? And each of us has to figure that out, you know?
Yeah. Well, so you just teed up an ideal closing question, which is, having written fiction at a high
Yeah.
level and now having completed a very personal nonfiction project, where are we in terms of what's ruminating or
Oh, what am I
what are you
doing?
leaning toward? Are you is there more nonfiction to be written or are you dying to get back into
It's
fiction?
such a good question. I have a novel that I've I've done research on, and has been percolating for 10 years.
Okay.
And I don't have the good structure for it. There are some practical things about it that make it very unlikely, like that, just hard to figure out, and
Mhm.
maybe I don't, maybe not even feasible, but there's a part of me that really, like if I had the funds and the institutional protection, I'd probably be working on it. I also have the Super Bowl in Las Vegas got me starting to write about memories of me and my involvement with sports in Las Vegas when I was growing up. And that might be a project that turns into something. But, hopefully your army of listeners will buy so many copies of I Will Do Better that that I will be allowed to, that if I wanted to write another piece of nonfiction, I would be able to do it. I would have the backing to do it, or the commercial viability to do it. Those are two things that I've been thinking about. I don't know exactly. I spent the summer working on a lot of projects related to the book, essays
Sure.
and things for it, and now I am going to have to figure something out. But I love writing fiction. Uh, uh, I don't think it's so time consuming, and it takes so long to percolate, and it's so commercial, and it's so financially unfeasible as a profession that
Right.
sometimes it's hard to see how to do it. But I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. I love the art of fiction. I love novels. I love short stories. I just don't know. I don't know if I get to be in it. I don't know.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons that I do this podcast and the work that I do, aside from my own writing, is I have only become more convinced over time that what you just said underscores why community is important. That
Yeah,
shame on any and all artists and creatives that are not doing the bare minimum to raise awareness, lift up others,
right.
recognize that it's not only is it not a zero sum game, the better any individual does, the better we all do. I truly believe that
Especially
both.
if I'm the individual doing better. If the equation is so great where if I do well, we all rise. That's like the ideal. I'm being funny. I thought that would get a laugh from you, but it got nothing. But I thought I
I
would
actually I think it's
that.
true. I think I truly believe that when I look at the state that the world is in right now, if the artists aren't willing to put a little more of themselves into this ocean and say, you know what, we've all got to swim together. How dare we blame the readership and the critics and you know
Right.
the non-engaged audience? Like we've got to help each other. So, I think what in addition to talking about your wonderful book, Charles, you've made a really compelling, honest, uh, convincing case for what really matters, which is integrity, the craft itself, and trying to find meaning from very hard work.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's nice of you to say, Sean. It was really a pleasure to talk with you about all this stuff. Thank you for
Well,
having me.
anybody that can write a book this good is someone that I'm going to welcome a conversation with. But also, while we're talking, someone name drops Moby Dick and Catch 22, which are easily in my top five.
They're pretty good. They're,
We're going to have to lock horns again. So consider this an open invite.
thank
Um,
you.
we can check in a little bit down the road and see what's going on in this kind of ever tenuous economic,
Yeah,
political, artistic model. But
I love it. Let me also just say, to return the favor, you're wearing a Jeff Bridges Lebowski shirt. So right back at you. Anyone who's rocking the Lebowski, yeah, always, always, always going to be a winner on my team. Yes,
well, the dudes abide.
the toots abide.
Charles, thank you, folks. Go out and get a copy or two of I Will Do Better. It's remarkable. Thank you for tuning in to Some Things Considered. Reminder, this is a podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity and creatives. We want to lift up the community and connect people by any means necessary. Buy books, support art, be involved, and stay
And
safe. We'll
don't
see you
roll
soon.
on Shomer Shabbos.
Yes. Thanks for tuning in to Some Things Considered. Find out more, including how to be a guest, at seanmurphy.net. Reminder, we are obsessed with story and celebrating creativity. Also, we're here to advocate for the arts by any means necessary. Drop us a line, get involved, and support our creatives who are the lifeblood of our culture. I'm Sean Murphy. See you on the next episode of Some Things Considered.